The deep state is coming for your free speech. Yes, they are, and I'll prove it to you in just a moment. Stay tuned, and I'll tell you more. Freedom of speech has not been the norm throughout history. In fact, just the opposite. It's the exception. And yet today, our freedom of speech, one of our most precious, fundamental, God-given rights, is in mortal danger. Even in places where free speech was the norm since, at least the Reformation, 500-600 years, places like the United Kingdom, Western Europe, the Netherlands, we literally now have pastors going to jail for questioning the orthodoxy, for quoting the Bible. Yes, it's true. If you quote the Bible on homosexuality, you can literally find yourself in jail. Pastor Åke Green was imprisoned in Sweden for criticizing homosexuality. They have secret agents that are going into churches. The Justice Ombudsman of Sweden actually investigated the Bible to find out whether it was a violation of Swedish hate speech laws and determined that, yes, it is. Not practical to ban it yet, but yeah, it's definitely a violation of our hate speech laws. He actually proposed that, maybe we could just change the language in the Bible to get around that problem. Obviously, if you're a Christian, that is completely unacceptable. And we think, well, that's the Scandinavia, that's Europe. We're America, right? We got First Amendment. Well, if the totalitarians are allowed to win, you can kiss your First Amendment goodbye. You can kiss your free speech goodbye. And I think it's important to emphasize how important freedom of speech is, okay? When we don't have freedom of speech, when we don't have uninhibited public debate, all kinds of bad things happen. We don't reach sensible conclusions because we don't have access to all the information we might need. And worse, violence often occurs because if people can't talk about their differences, if people can't settle their differences peacefully through speech, people pick up weapons and people do dumb things. So it's a very, very dangerous trajectory that the deep state and the anti-American totalitarians have us on. So there are a number of critical threats to our freedom of speech, and I want to mention a few of them. One is the United Nations. One is the big tech monstrosity in Silicon Valley. And then, of course, we have the anti-American leftists all across America and beyond. I'm referring, of course, to the Antifa type that will beat your head in with a baseball bat for saying something that they don't like. Okay, this is a major problem. So speaking of the United Nations, one of the major threats is actually coming from the UN International Telecommunications Union. This is the UN agency that the UN and the deep state hope is going to eventually regulate the internet and tax the internet. It's literally led by a member of the Communist Party of China. I kid you not. His name is Howlin Chow. And he actually argued early on in his tenure that censorship's just in the eye of the beholder. I mean, you can say, your view of censorship is different than my view of censorship. That's what he told a Korean reporter when he was asked. The UN human rights machine also rejects free speech. In fact, they repeatedly tell us, and they tell countries around the world, that they have to ban certain types of speech to comply with human rights. Right? If somebody is offended, hate speech, which of course is a Soviet term that was injected into the UN's lexicon back in the 1970s to silence critics of communism, all of that is a violation of human rights. The UN Security Council is right now working on a global plan to fight extremism, and by extremism they mean anything they don't like. In fact, they very frequently say that nonviolent extremism is in the crosshairs as well. Okay, get that through your head. Nonviolent extremism. And I think it's pretty ironic, right? What could be more extreme than the mass murdering dictatorships and the kleptocrats and the gangsters that make up what is called the United Nations? I don't know, but the UN is now going to target it. We also have in the crosshairs of the UN ideologies that the UN says are unacceptable. In particular, they point to anti-Muslim bigotry, which includes criticizing Islam. They also say opposition to mass migration is a hate speech, is an ideology that needs to be targeted. Even the traditional view of marriage, gender, and homosexuality needs to be banned according to the UN's totalitarian view of human rights. And this is partly because of the UN's grotesque view of human rights. We've done a whole episode on this. In America, our founding fathers said it was a self-evident truth that God gave us rights, and we actually create governments to protect those rights. Under the UN view, the government and international agreements give you privileges, but according to Article 29, those privileges may never be used contrary to the purposes and principles of the UN. Right? Totally contradictory view. These two can't coexist. It's either going to be our view, the American view, or the totalitarian view where you have no rights. Okay, the UN is a leading threat to free speech, and it is a wholly owned subsidiary of the UN. Another one of these big threats is big tech. They are working fiendishly to silence you, to silence opinions they don't like, to silence truth that makes them look bad. In fact, they're working openly with the UN, with the European Union, with the mass murdering dictatorship enslaving China, and even with the U.S. government to suppress dissent. The European Union actually convened all the big tech companies and made them agree to a statement of principles, promising that they would remove all hate speech. And again, hate speech is anything they don't like. If you criticize mass migration, if you criticize homosexuality, if you criticize all kinds of things, and you may not be criticizing any of those things yet, but who knows? Maybe the next hate speech is something that you do want to criticize. Okay, Europol, their wannabe police agency, they've actually got a whole unit now aimed at removing extremist content from the internet and stopping the spread of, and I'm quoting, alternative messages. Okay, when U.S. Senate candidate Dr. Shiva, and we've interviewed him about this right here, he sued Twitter, and what he found out in federal court was that Twitter was actually acting on orders from a government bureaucrat. You really can't tell where the big tech companies end and the government begins, and that's been true from the beginning. Don't forget that a lot of these big tech companies were actually founded by arms of the government. Google was started with help from DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Facebook was started with help from key people from InQtel, the investment arm of the intelligence community. These people are not kidding, folks. And you get the idea that they're private actors out of your mind. They're not. They're acting as state agents. We've got public-private partnerships, the wave of the future, where you don't get any First Amendment, but the big profits go to the deep state gazillionaires. Okay, and of course they're working with extremists in government and the extremists out on the street, people like Antifa. They actually, when I landed in Atlanta, Atlanta literally put out my picture and they said, "Hey, Alex Newman just landed in Atlanta." Okay, talk about intimidation. These are fascists. These are totalitarians, and they want to silence people using violence and intimidation. And so they're burning down cities. They're beating people with bike locks. And, the U.S. government doesn't see anything, but parents are complaining about critical race theory and sexualization of their children in the schools. That's domestic terrorism. Okay, this is so outrageous, folks. We also have Islamic jihadists working to silence the conversation. Just recently, a conservative member of parliament in the UK was stabbed by a Somali jihadi in a church. Brannon Howse, a very well-known conservative figure, he can't even have events anymore because jihadists threaten to come and shoot it up or blow it up. They can't even get insurance or security to protect them. So we have a major problem, folks. Our free speech is in the crosshairs. This was completely transparent when the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, issued an order for Homeland Security, the FBI, and the DOJ to start targeting parents as domestic terrorists for intimidating and harassing school board members. Okay, they absolutely want to silence you. They want to terrorize you, and they want you to shut up about it. And eventually, they want to put you in prison. Now, it's taken longer in America because we have the First Amendment to protect us. But if you think the deep state's going to let a little pesky thing like the First Amendment get in the way of silencing you and enslaving you, you've got another thing coming. If you want to preserve your free speech, you have got to get involved. You have got to fight this battle. We have got to get the United States out of the United Nations. We've got to reject the perverted UN view of human rights as privileges granted by government that can be limited by those same governments. We have got to ensure that our state and our local law enforcement agencies deal with terrorists and Antifa that want to beat people and silence people and burn down things because they don't agree with something you might have said. There's great efforts right now happening across the country to rein in big tech. One of the options is just free market. Quit using it. Get off of these big tech companies that are spying on you, that hate you, that are silencing you, and move to greener pastures. Another one is great state efforts like in Montana. We've done some work on that. We've actually interviewed State Senator Teresa Manzella and Public Service Commissioner Randy Pinocci right here on this New American channel to talk about an initiative they led. They failed by one rhino vote to pass a law that would make it illegal for these big tech companies to discriminate against you based on your religious views, if you're a Christian, or your political views, if you're a conservative. And so I hope, folks, that you understand this threat from the deep state. We must protect our free speech. Our civilization literally depends on our ability to speak, to communicate with each other. And if you don't like what somebody's saying, that's fine. We all disagree with some people, and there's a remedy to that in a free society. It's called more speech. Somebody says something dumb, you explain why that thing is dumb. There are civilized solutions to having bad ideas be put on the ash heap of history. Censorship, bullying, violence, and regulation are not among them. Okay? So I'm Alex Newman. You've been watching Behind the Deep State. Thank you so much for tuning in. Help get this out, folks. Our free speech is on the line. Until next time, God bless you.
If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe, hit like, hit that little bell so that you'll be notified whenever we post new videos. And also, please make sure to share this video with your friends. Email's a great way to do it. Remember, there are powerful forces working to steal our freedom and destroy our country. We need to work together, expose those behind the deep state. Otherwise, you can kiss your liberties goodbye.